Hello, welcome, little creatures. We have an amazing astrologer here. He is from a wonderful channel that I found down the wombat hole, and he is really passionate about bringing to people this divine wisdom so that they can unlock why you're here on Earth, what's happening, how to mitigate negative karmas. We really appreciate you watching this video, enjoying this comment, and encourage you to comment, like, book a session with us. If you feel called, you can help us financially. We really appreciate the support. We really appreciate any feedback in the comments. Tell us about where you have this placement. We want to hear your experiences. We read through the comments, and go check out Down the Wombat Hole. He has a lot of fascinating topics. And also, please tell us, what do you want us to cover? We're open for new ideas. Who should I have on the show? Connect me. Tell me your stories in the comments. This, whatever you want. Make this community. This is what we're growing together, is building a more spiritualized earth, harmonizing with the Christ impulse, with all of the divine energies, and really making it through and being a support for the people. We're going through this new eon is arising and the old is leaving, and we want to be in this wave, surfing it and bringing about the highest possible virtues and blessings for whoever stops by this channel. So thank you for exploring. You're here for a reason. You're watching this for a purpose. This is not random. You might be seeing some synchronicities right now, like check the time. Like, this is your sign of what you're supposed to be doing, and you can feel it in your soul. And check out the other content too. I have the Lemic, I have a whole tarot card. You can literally understand the deepest esoteric knowledge of the tarot through my tarot series, which was it was an amazing channel that I found and I uploaded here. So check it out. Go and become an occult expert. So Isaac, tell us about, today we're going to be covering the beautiful third house and making this a reference for anyone who can return to this video over and over and over and really deepen their knowledge of the third house in astrology. So
lovely. Thanks, Lugal. Yeah, that tarot series is really cool. I have it on my watch list to hopefully make it all the way through soon.
Beautiful.
Yeah. All right. So third of our planets of the houses series. Third house, interesting one. I always, when I'm sort of going through a chart or dealing with transits, I often find the third house the hardest to actually properly or immediately understand how that will manifest. So third house it's things which often seem less consequential. I've heard many other astrologers say that third house transits will often be the least felt, that they'll be the least obvious in our lives. And that's because the third house is really about things which are local and immediate. So which we might experience as not necessarily important because they're just taken for granted their everyday life. So we had the first house, which is about us, defining ourselves, who we are, what are, the nature of our appearance, of our identity, of our ego. Second house is about then securing ourselves. We have ourselves. How do we secure ourselves? Make us safe, make ourselves supported. And so we had, wealth, financial wealth, material wealth, assets, a sense of security, physical security, shelter, all those sort of like hierarchy of needs things, right, that are right at the foundational level of what a human needs to survive and thrive. Third house, we've got that security. And now we're starting to venture out now into the external world, into the world around us. And we're starting to really learn about what that world is. So it's less about going more and more, or less and less, I should say, about us and about more of what's around us. So third house is when we're like, okay, I'm going to leave my safety and security now, but I'm going to do it in the most immediate, the most easy, the most obvious way possible. So third house represents those things in life which are close, which are immediate, and which are local. So local is often the main word I sort of come to. So local would be neighbours. Neighbours is a very obvious one. So a third house transit might bring up issues to do with neighbours, or the people who live on our street, or the people we sort of walk past when we're walking the dog each day, who we see at the post office, for example. That's sort of the third house domain, is those really close things. So it's also associated with Mercury being the third house, and Mercury being the third sign. So we can sort of use those mercurial qualities to sort of help prompt us about third house things. So things to do with learning. Learning's a big one, third house, particularly sort of local learning. So primary school experiences with primary school will be typically third house things. Local business, shops, the experiences with sort of getting things that we need to support us locally. So the short trips that we make. So third house is a polarity to the ninth house, and ninth house is about everything that's far away or immaterial. So, ninth house is sort of foreign, like long trips, foreign trips, overseas, exotic things. Whereas third house is just bringing it right back to local. So it's where we learn. So not just primary school. Primary school is where we learn to interact with other people. It's where we learn the basics of education. It's where we learn the basics of socialization as well. So these are all third house things, and so it makes sense that primary school will be part of that. So we had neighbours, but also siblings as well. So siblings is seems to be the most sort of quote unquote like personal aspect of the third house. So if you do have a transit third house, you might show up particularly in relation to siblings, if you have siblings, or something along those lines. People in our life which are sort of there largely by proximity, and we often take them for granted. So yeah, just a few general sort of things we can bring in there. I also associate the third house with where we learn to be competitive. So our first sense of being competitive, and Mercury does like that competitive aspect. So I think sport is probably a big one as well. So if you have like Mars in the third house, that's Mars in the third house, Mars in the 11th house are sort of sporty archetypes, I guess would be one way I'd put that. So learning, interacting with what's close to you, with your siblings, peers, acquaintances. So all that in the third house. So that's the basics. Should we get to the planets and sort of work through them? We might be able to get this one a bit quicker, hopefully, on the last few. So Sun in the third house. Very intelligent, so learns very quickly and easily, just absorbs knowledge, but not necessarily book knowledge, like knowledge about real life experiences. So you sort of go to the local shops, or you go to the post office, and you felt like that was a really meaningful experience about you. You learned something about the world. You learned how to interact with someone. You learned how to be. You learned about what a social convention is, or what a social obligation is. That sort of Sun in the third house. Always been really at home, and being a leader in that neighborhood. So you might be a neighborhood leader. You might do a neighborhood watch thing, or you might hold a sort of some sort of local. You might spearhead a local initiative. So neighborhood watch. Verge gardens. Clean up the street, clean up the local park. That's all like something that the Sun in the third house would lead. Making sure your local environment is as best and is as inspiring as it can be. And they probably thrive in primary school, thrive in that really immediate sort of local environment, and probably less so in that sort of ninth house, like higher knowledge sort of things. So let's say a comparison with the third house and ninth house. If you're into sort of teaching, third house might be teaching either like primary school, or teaching or sharing knowledge through a periodical. So a blog post that you do every week, or a podcast that you do like every week, but you do it periodically and sequentially and repetitively, I guess. So that's that sort of Mercury thing. Whereas ninth house, you learn by doing a thesis or writing a book. It's grander and it's more a sort of one-off thing.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing because that's the way I feel like I like to learn the best. Even though I listen to audiobooks and I do like doing that, but that's why I started this channel. I have the North Node in the third house, so I'm like really enjoying like learning through my guests and having this. And that's how we really started this idea. Was I was telling Isaac about how I want to learn astrology, and yeah, that's how we birthed this, is through that kind of energy.
Yeah. So I see you just very quickly ask the right question. You're like, oh, something comes up, you're like, okay, what's the question? What's the right question to sort of ask there? So always looking for the opportunity to sort of learn something very immediately and quickly. So that's how I always sort of understand how that manifests. But yeah, so I assume you feel very much drawn to be a leader in your local community. What you imagine to be your local community, you would see yourself as being at the forefront of that. That's sort of how I would see that. That sort of
and help me
third
make
house.
this community, help that dream happen. I'm like, I incarnated for this purpose, so please support us however you feel called to.
Yep. Lovely. Indeed. So let's say, so Sun in the third house, what's the shadow? What's the overbearingness of the Sun there? It's just becoming too intent on changing things locally and sort of missing the bigger picture. So just wanting to sort of change those things which are close and easy, but not actually engaging with the broader world. You know, you might just want to spend your whole life just within your local street or within your neighborhood and not feel the need to actually expand your horizons. You know, ninth house is expanding horizons. So it's about going through that. So
don't just have a lemonade stand, y'all. You know, maybe go and have like a lemonade store, right? Don't just sit there with your little, quarters. Maybe you could make $1 each lemonade, right?
Yeah. Nice, lovely. Yeah. So not being a big fish in a small pond as well. You know, once you sort of find yourself that you've mastered your local environment, not being satisfied with that, and still moving on to bigger and better things. That's sort of one thing to keep.
Yeah,
if you have,
life gives you lemonades. Make lemonade stores. Wow.
Nice. Move to the next level. Yeah. So that's Sun. Moon in the third house. So third house are things which are familiar to us, easy and familiar. So it's like having an emotional familiarity with things, if that makes sense. So you like having things close to you which you resonate with on a sort of, which you feel close to. You might intrinsically act as some sort of motherhood figure within your local community, even in your neighborhood. Let's say like literally the neighborhood mother. You're playing that nurturing, lunar role in your street, at your local park, at your local sporting team. You're sort of adopting, you're moving into that motherly role, that nurturing, caring role. Moon in third house, like I say, very sort of deep emotional connections with siblings. If you have siblings, will be sort of, and this deep long siblings and acquaintances and peers, and again playing that sort of motherly role to those people very immediate in your life. And you learn, so again, third house learning, your mode of learning is very emotional. So you're picking up on the emotional cues of other people, or how they react differently to different situations, how they control their emotions or express their emotions. And that'll be a key way that a moon in the third house would actually go about learning and familiarizing themselves with the social world and with their local world. So moon, the waxing and waning, it'll be someone who might go missing locally as well. So they might have a role in the community, which is really important, but they might sometimes just like go missing suddenly because, things become a bit too much. And then suddenly, that sort of fluctuating role in your local environment So you have to sort of ride that out, and people have to be aware that that is your natural tendency. It's not that you can't be relied upon, but you're not going to be the most stable, consistent.
I'm IA.
Yep. And, you know, the moon, wherever the moon is, the moon needs that. The moon will. So I have moon in the 10th house. Sometimes I feel like I need to be right in the public eye, but sometimes I'm like, no, I need to retreat and just pull back. So it's that sort of to and fro that the moon always has. And it's just who Luna is. She waxes and wanes as part of her sort of natural archetypal nature. So this idea of like that the moon, how the moon in the 3rd house would learn, the shadow of that would be just like really copying or imitating other people rather than being yourself, sort of reflecting back what other people do rather than sort of being yourself. Overly competitive, like passive aggressive competitiveness, because the moon, you know, does things very emotionally rather than obviously and expressively. So yeah, and just being very moody, you know, being known as just a sort of moody person who might be a happy face walking past you one day and then the next day sort of has a frown on their face and doesn't want to even make eye contact. So just things to be aware of if you have the moon in this sort of environment. I mean, nothing really can go too bad in the 3rd house. That's sort of how it's not that it's inconsequential, but the states are just a bit lower in the 3rd house. That's sort of one way I sort of imagine it in my head. So Mercury in the 3rd house. So this is a very mercurial individual. You've got, you know, this would be the house that a Mercury would probably be most at home in, because it's just like, you know, going back and forth, to and fro, synergizing, learning, exchanging information, and you can do that best in your local environment, can't you? So this is, you know, I almost imagine like the sort of the person who's always at the post office, always either delivering mail or picking up mail, or just is there to sort of say hi, just wants to sort of talk to someone. And I'm just going to go to the post office for no reason, just so I can have an exchange of information and communicate and learn from someone. So they'd be very, Mercury in the 3rd house, again, very inquisitive, very quick to adapt to the cues of other people, very business orientated. So 3rd house is often sort of like trade and local business. So they'll be very tapped into what their what their neighbourhood needs and how they can provide that. And they could, you know, be quite prosperous from sort of playing that role. Mercury wants to know everything. So I sort of imagine Mercury in the 3rd house, the shadow is like that neighbour always peeking over the sort of fence to sort of get into other people's business. Just wants to know everything that's going on. So a bit gossipy, and that would be Venus in the 3rd house as well. Venus in the 3rd house wants to know all the dirty, gossipy details of everything that's going on. Venus 3rd house probably like falls in love with the boy next door or the girl next door, and imagines romance in terms of what's immediate and doesn't consider romance outside of that. So Venus in the 3rd house would have a very high value on education, on early education. So I can see Venus in the 3rd house, you know, being, you know, very well suited to sort of a primary school teacher or that sort of role. They'd be highly popular and highly well regarded in their local community. So Venus in 3rd house, probably the most, you know, well known or famous person in their neighbourhood, because that's where their focus is and that's where they sort of express their desires and their values. They put them into practice in that 3rd house. What else we got here? So popularity. Venus in the 3rd house, very good sibling relationships, I'd say as well. You still got me there? Yeah, I just froze for a second. Well, good, cool. What else? So Venus, that's pretty good summary. So that's the polarity of Mars. Mars, I imagine they're very sort of like drawn towards expressing themselves in local sports, so like grassroots sport, because there's that activeness and that ability to release aggression and assert themselves, but in a very local sort of neighborhoody way. So Mars, you know, very competitive. Local sports might be sort of a coach of a local sporting team. Local activism, like Mars 3rd house, would just the sun would sort of like lead local initiatives, but Mars would just really drive it and initiate it and start it and really actively want to change things in their local environment. So that they would be happy to sort of knock on people's doors and do those sort of things which other people might not want to do, not want to be. You sort of have these sort of people in the neighborhood who might be problematic and who other people don't want to sort of talk to. Mars will be the one who would go up and say, stop it, stop being a dickhead, stop bringing down our street, our neighborhood. That Mars in the third house will be the one who actually gets off their ass and actually goes and does the things which other people might not want to do for fear of, getting a bad local reputation or whatever. Mars is happy to do that. The converse of that is just being a local menace, like just antagonizing everyone, getting into fights with neighbors for no good reason, being overly competitive. So Mars in the third house could be, the person who just starts always getting into fights in their local footy team because they just can't help themselves. They have to express themselves or assert themselves in that domain, and so they go too far and they make what should be healthily competitive things into overly competitive things. So that's always a problem for Mars. And then Mars is just like hostile sibling relationships as well, could be one way to, or just sibling relationships which are difficult to negotiate, I guess. So yeah, that's Mars. Anything to add before we move on to next ones? Lovely, we're doing well here. Jupiter in the third house. So someone who seeks to elevate and expand and dignify their local environment. So they'd be the ones who want to sort of turn just as a way to sort of raise up things. So they might have, the sort of the nicest house and the most well-maintained house as a way of sort of elevating their street. For example, they might be drawn towards, so local education is third house. So like spiritual education, so that they might hold, virtues classes for kids on their street as a way to sort of spiritually uplift the local environment. What else? But then the shadow of that would be this overly preachy, sermonizing person, or even the person who like pushes religion onto all their neighbors. Just like goes on, knocks on all their neighbors' doors and tries to convert them to whatever sort of faith they have. That's the sort of the shadow of Jupiter, and thinking that they're better than everyone else on their street, or that they are the superior sibling, and that their sibling doesn't meet their virtuous standards. So that's always the sort of downside of Jupiter. And Jupiter would be just like being too present in local affairs. So wanting to sort of every P&C meeting, every local neighborhood, every sort of gathering in the park, they have to be there. They have to be that person who's always there, always sort of having an exaggerated impact in that domain of life. So yeah, a few things there. What else? Saturn. What's the other come there? So Saturn is someone who just would not want to engage locally. So that sort of grouch who won't say hi to people because they don't feel like it's worthwhile. They just want to sort of not engage in their local environment. And so your biggest test in the third house is just being open to learning from everyday experiences, to not think that you have to sort of learn or interact in incredibly meaningful ways, in exotic foreign ways, to actually realize I can get what I need, get pretty much everything I need just from being local, not thinking large, not thinking in that ninth house stuff, but just bringing things back to local. Saturn is challenges and trials and where we're most vulnerable. So that in the third house might manifest with siblings. So there could be difficulties with siblings. There could be difficulty with what else? Primary school. So maybe like a difficult difficult primary school experiences, might be Saturn third house. Yeah, they're the main things which sort of come to mind. But eventually, so again, there's that long-term enduring gains from where Saturn is. So the third house Saturn is someone whose influence in the neighborhood becomes increasingly meaningful and stabilizing over time. And so it might take them a while to grow into their neighborhood setting. Eventually that they become that solid, that rock solid local figure who people know that they can turn to if they need to. Maybe like the sort of the person who's most who can be most relied upon to prop up the local sporting team, or to sort of get things done, to sort of do the things which no one else, which other people might forget about in the making sure a lot, making sure those plants are watered, those sort of things. So Saturn will make sure that those things do get done. So and you sort of see again with it, this might not seem that meaningful or that obvious or that sort of substantial, but it's still an equally valuable domain of life as every other house. It just has a different, a less obvious sort of focus to it, I guess. All right, outer planets, let's finish these off. So Uranus in the third house. So we think about learning, it's sort of like self-learning, self-education. Maybe probably like Wad primary school a lot, because didn't feel like they had the need to learn from other people. So I've got this, I can do it myself. Very free, very liberating in how they learn and express themselves locally. So they might be the person who brings life. So this Aquarian Uranus, they bring life to their neighborhood. They bring life to their local environment. They provide spontaneity in a domain of life which might not have much spontaneity, because people just do. It's just where people are doing their everyday things. So Uranus there will actually shake things up. So shaking up your street where no one does anything, no one interacts. You're the person who sort of just goes in there and gets just very gently but still slightly disruptively brings about change locally. The shadow of that would be like bringing chaos. So you have a nice quiet neighborhood where everyone sort of feels safe and well acquainted, and you come in and just basically turn it into complete chaos. That's what Uranus can do in the shadow side of things. That's the main thing that sort of comes to mind. Neptune is again always tough to describe, especially something which is fairly mundane like the third house. So if we take education and learning, it's sort of learning through imagination. So Neptune always engages the imagination, has that sort of dreamlike, transcendent quality to it. So a Neptunian primary school teacher would teach through fantasy, through the use of like fiction, even through the use of stories, through the use of imagination, by appealing to higher ideals. So that's how Neptune would approach like dealing with those sort of issues. So I guess the numbers that would be using educational approaches which are dishonest or deceitful and not actually based in reality. So you're teaching things which aren't real, and you're encouraging people to believe in fantasies or that sort of thing. It's just been very elusive within the neighborhood. So, and that might put people off because you sort of pop up in places where people don't expect you to be, or you just sort of like sneak up on people, or Neptune sort of infiltrating. So people might see you as someone who's like infiltrating their neighborhood. So again, just things to sort of
one's a spy.
The spy, yes, that's it. Like Neptune is that sort of spy.
Your local
vibe,
spy.
Yeah, indeed. Nice.
Just like burrow
like
their head through the lawn and say, hey, and like, what the F are you doing in my lawn?
Yeah.
Get off my lawn. I hate when
Neptune.
I like try to turn on my toaster and my neighbors appear like in my toaster and they're like, "Hey," and I'm like, "What are you doing?" Like it's totally your Uranus like is like popping up and
Yeah.
yeah.
So Uranus would do that more obviously, whereas Neptune would just suddenly, just sort of like sneak up on you. Yeah.
I feel like
So
Neptune would become the toaster.
nice. Yes. Well, that's a good one. So Neptune is always in danger of losing their identity or finding their identity in others.
That's the toaster.
Yeah. So I'm the toaster, and so Neptune might almost want to like merge with those, like merge with their sibling, merge with their peers, and lose themselves in their local environment rather than maintaining their own identity as well. So yeah, Pluto in the third house. How do you have power in the local? How do you utilize power in the local environment? So
I picture like some like local vampire that's just like going around like at
the local
night
creep.
walking
Yeah.
around.
So actually, so the shadow would be like that sort of that creep in the neighborhood
when you're
who
living, when you're living next to Nosferatu. Like,
nice.
when you're living,
So
hashtag when you're living next to Vlad the Impaler. That's like all of the people's heads on a stake. Like hashtag Pluto in the third house. Whoa.
nice. Yeah.
By the way, should we make a Pluto in the third house crop top t-shirt for everyone to wear? Like, I've got Pluto in the third house. Look out. That'd be so much fun.
Keep your eyes on me. Nice. So, yeah, so I can that'd be the person who you have a conversation with when you're just like passing by them in the street, and it's suddenly becomes the most meaningful or the most intense conversation you've had in like the last few months. And it was supposed to be just every day saying hi to someone, but the other person suddenly turned it into this really intense, compelling experience. That's what Pluto in the third house would be, turning these very everyday interactions, these modes of learning, to something really like, oh, you suddenly just unearthed something I didn't even realize was there. So like Pluto in the third house, it might be the investigative journalist who wants to get to the bottom of all the local secrets which have been sort of swept under the carpet. Like what was the history of this town? What's its dirty little secrets? What tribe was sort of massacred for this town to be built? These sort of things. Pluto in the third house want to get to the bottom of those, unearthing secrets, local secrets. They find education highly transformative. So again, this idea of transformation with Pluto. So they might be like the tyrannical principal of the primary school, that's sort of the Pluto vibe, or they might be the sort of the president of the local sporting team who wants to utilize their power in that domain and control everything in that environment. And so there's always the problem of like abuse with Pluto. So abuse, the worst manifestation of that, which things we need to sort of be aware of is, the person who does perpetuate abuse within the neighborhood, or who is abusive to their siblings or to their peers and gets involved in these sort of nasty power dynamics with people in their local immediate environments. So that's sort of Pluto there. A North Node third house, which is your placement. So yeah, it's someone who feels drawn towards playing a significant role in their neighborhood or in the local. It doesn't have to, when you say neighborhood, it doesn't have to be like spatial, like as in literally your suburb. It can be what you experience as neighborhood. And we're in we're moving towards the age of Aquarius. So increasingly we're understanding things like neighborhood, community in a more non-local form, if that makes sense. So third house can be expressed in digitally, online. So not necessarily understand the third house in just sort of like physically local terms, but in that broader Aquarian sense as well. And I can see, I'm not sure, what your local situation is, sibling situation, but interesting to know how you might see your North Node influencing what you perceive to be your local environment, your neighborhood, your peers, your acquaintances, your sort of, to some extent, your tribe. But the tribe is sort of the more 11th house sort of thing. But it's still, the third house is still an air house, like the 11th house as well. So they have that commonality. that idea of using your intellect very strongly and learning. Yeah, so I think Rahu third house, someone who's just very practical. So taking ninth house things and bringing them down to what can be easily taught, easily shared with people to increase their understanding. So making things very very tangible and easily shared, information that's easily shared in a very immediate sort of way. And of course, Rahu third house means Ketu ninth house, so that's someone who can get stuck or held back in ninth house issues as well. So needing to be too esoteric, needing to always find some higher meaning in things rather than just focusing on what is immediate and easily applied, I guess. And yeah, Rahu third house, just it would be someone who is has this sort of social butterfly tendency to them as well. Like they feel drawn towards interacting with as many people as possible and really getting the most out of those interactions as well. So when we have calls, you're always asking questions. You're always wanting to sort of do more with those interactions because the opportunity's there. Yeah, so that's about all I've got. Anything you want to add before we finish this one off?
Thanks everyone who's watching. Please comment your position and your experience with it. We want to hear it. We'll read the comments. Subscribe, like, continue to build your spiritual curiosity and hunger through this channel. Suggest people we should interview. Suggest videos for us to cover. We listen to your feedback. We love it. Consider booking a session with us individually or together. Tarot and astrology is a beautiful combination that links up. Consider if you want to support us financially to help us do even more content, we would love that. And go check out Down the Wombat Hole and support Isaac's content as well. So thanks to everyone who has watched this. Many, many, many blessings. Om Namah Shivaya.